Energy Institute. I'm Kerry Keene. Next week's speaker will be Frank Mail, who is a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Texas. He's done a lot of study of the hydraulic fracturing process, sort of the physics, what's actually happening in the rocks when you break them apart and how does stuff flow out. So he's going to give us a feel for that and also give us a feel for some of the statistics of other kinds of results and parameters from unconventional oil and gas production and relating to inputs like water and sand and the drilling costs, because he's looking at these details to, in some sense, match some of the physical information and parameters to economic implications. So he's been studying this diligently for the last few years and has written a couple highly cited papers on the topic. So that should be pretty good. So we'll have our physics lecture next time. Today we have Mike Sloan, who is local to the area here, energy consultant for over 30 years. So he knows Texas politics and Texas energy. He was a part of groups that were heavily involved in designing the restructured electricity market in Texas when it was in the late 1990s when they were debating this, and then the laws got passed to do this. So he's a wealth of information, and he's been a renewable advocate involved with renewable energy organizations such as the Texas Renewable Energy Industries Association, or TRIA, and the Wind Coalition. So today we are going to get his take on what he says here, which costs less, fossil fuels or renewables, and his take on how we, I don't know if you're going to talk about math, like Andrew Yang just has a little pin on his, at the debates that say math, because he likes math. I think Mike likes math too. I like math. So we're going to get his take on math versus words maybe a little bit, and we'll go from there. Mike, take it away. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. Yeah. All right, well, I see a lot of familiar faces here and some I don't, and I'm going to start with sort of a couple survey things. First, I want to get a sense of who's in the room in terms of more on the technical engineering side. Okay, and then what about more like economics? So dollar signs in front of the numbers usually. Then what about law? Have any law people in here? I need at least one lawyer. Please tell me there's a lawyer in here. There's no lawyer here. Law school? Somebody thinking about pre-law, maybe thinking about going to law school. You know, engineering to law, it's a good one. No, okay. All right, well, let me start with my survey then. On this question, for powering our future, which is cheaper, fossil fuel or clean energy? I want to see how many people say fossil fuel. Any fossil fuels for the future? Okay, well, to me that doesn't really matter because I'm not a futurist. I'm a nowist. It's about what's going on right now. And so I want to re-ask this question. Who thinks that right now fossil fuels are cheaper? Okay, is that about roughly half, hands going up? What about who think clean energy is cheaper right now? Okay, it's still probably about an even mix. Okay. Well, just listen well and I'll give you the answer. Okay. All right. The real answer is, of course, it's debatable. You know, different people look at different things. They place different import on different things. So I'm going to start with this one. There's sort of two batches of energy. This is old slides. These slides are probably 10 years old here in this particular thing. So back in the day, we always had this issue where clean and green was always considered more expensive than what I'm going to just characterize as cheap and stinky. Okay? Now, some people would say, though, well, wait a minute. We know fuel costs are going to go up in the future, right? So if you really think life cycle cost, maybe this stuff is cheaper. And then other people say, well, what if you throw in like the emissions, environmental issues, then clearly already this one is cheaper. Right? Well, what about if you throw in military expenditures too? Some people think that that's appropriate. Then starting to tip the scale. I'm going to ask you about this one because this comes up a lot right now in the debate. What if the end of the world is at stake and you monetize that? Then which one is cheaper? And this is where I need an economist. Who's a good economist in here? I want to know if this is, say, 30% cheaper. We go out 100 years. The end of the world, what is the discount rate you need to still justify this investment? Right? Is there any economist that wants to take that on and send me the answer later? Because, right, if you have the discount rate high enough, it doesn't matter what happens out in the future. You can still justify staying on this course, right? At least give me some sort of feedback. The economists here in the room, is that true or not true?
I've read the paper.
What's that?
3 or 4% or higher will do it.
3 or 4% or higher will do it. That's not even a very big number. Okay. So, oops, that's probably not what I wanted to do. End of the world. Now, fortunately, we don't have to go to the end of the world, because what's going on now is the clean and green has gotten so cheap that now it is generally cheaper than this stuff. Now, of course, it depends on what all we're talking about, how we're putting it together, but in general, that's true. I'm going to show you some stuff, and this is what I really want to do. The whole purpose of my talk is I want to engage in a robust discussion. I know some people don't agree with me, and I'll say Bill Peacock from TPPF, I consider him a friend, but man, we're on like, it's about as far distant ends of the spectrum on the way we see things as can be. And in fact, I was just at a conference. Is anybody here familiar with the Gulf Coast Power Association conference? Okay. I was just there the last couple days. That's where I saw him. But almost 10 years ago, we were on a panel together, and I mean, I felt so bad about, like, I disagreed with his stuff so bad. I had a picture of Pepe Le Pew that I used up on the screen. And I'm not going to use that today because I don't have it cleared with Warner Brothers or whoever that it is that I have to get approval from. Disney, whoever owns them now, I don't even know. But so I'm not going to have anything like that. But we are going to talk about subsidies. And I got to say, our esteemed introducer, I threatened him I was going to talk the whole hour, about the subsidy study they just put out recently, because I was like, I really had some problems with quite a few things in it. But I got talked off the ledge because I'm madder about other things now, okay? But I'm going to bring up a few things here on subsidies. 10 years ago, well, a little over 10 years ago, there was, I'm going to go way, way back. In 1995, with some of the people in this room, I worked on a Texas Renewable Energy Resource Assessment for the state of Texas. Then I guess this would have been 13 years later, they decided to do another version of it, an update. And I gathered together about 50 people, went in, and we were reviewing its comprehensive assessment of resources in Texas. And as part of that, I was still doing some work for the coalition then, and so I said that if I need to, I can drop off of it. But as it turned out, for whatever reason, I got asked to drop off the project, even though I was no longer working with the wind industry anymore. So basically, I got fired off the project, and the main reason was, and this was back when oil was $120 a barrel. And we would write it, the internal staff and the technical team would say, yeah, you can't say oil, we're using it because it's cheap. It's got high energy density, it's got all this great stuff, but you can't say it's cheap. Well, it always editorialized, come back, and so I'd always be striking it out and say, you can say a lot of great things about it, oil and gas, but don't say we're using it at $120 a barrel because it's cheap. That's cheaper than the other alternatives. Natural gas is cheaper, batteries were cheaper. But I think they got tired of me always writing that in the edits. So anyway, we've moved on, but then Frontier and Associates, and Jay Zarnicki is here somewhere. That's actually his firm. We were working together on this. They took over, did a great job, but when they finished it up, one of the things that they found was that Texas energy subsidies at that time, and I think Matt Weldon mentioned this about a month ago, this very study, but if you just look at the numbers, it's 99.6% of the state incentives at that time went to oil and gas. Now, in contrast, we're going to move forward, and I'm going to try to I'm going to try not to delve on this too long, but I got to say, I would really love if UT would do a mulligan on this one. Pull it back, look at it more carefully, because this didn't come out that long ago, and it really seems like it doesn't capture truly what's going on with subsidies at the state level for energy sources. So I've just plucked a few of the key highlights here. And the thing that really gets me irked is because uniquely CREZ was considered a subsidy. That's a renewable energy program. It was $7 billion worth of transmission lines, but it was uniquely placed exclusively on wind power. Even though, it supports solar, it supports running oil and gas wells out in West Texas, and two, our entire system is socialized in transmission. Everyone pays for transmission costs in their bill. So I had some issues with that. But then when you look, basically it looks like coal and natural gas aren't subsidized, and nuclear power is not subsidized. And how many people are aware of how many states are directly subsidizing nuclear power to try to help it compete against wind right now? Wind and solar and gas. There's 5 states. 5 states that give between $10 and $20 a megawatt hour to help prop up their nuclear industry right now. So, at a minimum, if this is meant to sort of capture broader stuff that's going on, it would be good to do that. And another thing that's in the renewable energy numbers is that are in the renewable energy numbers there is the Renewable Energy Credit Program, which traces back to a bill from 1999, which a couple other really big things from that bill were stranded cost recovery. That was a huge one for nuclear. And then there was a grandfathered power plant that was about $1 billion worth of investment in these plants. It didn't show up in here. So again, if you guys could go back and redo this or open it up, that'd be awesome. Okay, you have a...
Give me a chance for some
yes.
clarifications or rebuttals. I think I agree roughly with everything you said, that those are valid things. Of course, we limited what we looked at in the study, which did not include things that happened more than 10 years ago, or further back than 10 years ago. The first bullet there shows, as you mentioned, CREZ, competitive renewable energy zones, included and excluded, so at least you include that bullet. So we don't force people to make the calculation themselves. We took it out, and that was a disagreement amongst the authors. We had multiple authors, it wasn't just one, and we agreed to disagree and put both numbers in to let people think about it. And the other main point about this is that the study was not about all energy subsidy. It was only things that related to the electricity supply chain. So we would have not included anything having to do with oil extraction, for example.
And I realized it was limited. It was parsed up. And for those that are in engineering, familiar with the concept of a control volume, right? You're drawing a line, a boundary, on what you're going to include and what you're not. And that's really, really important. Because one thing that I'll just point out right now, in the summary here, solar receives $256 per megawatt hour. That's 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And if that's meant to be indicative of what states are handing out as subsidies, I will tell you that is 10 times more than what it costs to go get a solar power contract in Texas right now. It is way beyond what the cost of solar is today. So it is not at all representative. And if I recall, I think you got that from the Austin Energy Rebate Program. Yes?
No, that's incorrect, but I'll state what it is. So drawing a boundary around the analysis, there are 2 main ways that we thought about doing it, and we only roughly chose one. One is all these numbers are essentially annual spending, and that year by megawatt hours by that year. That's not the only way to do it, and arguably not the best way to do it. The other way is, perhaps as you're hinting, is to look at an individual project and say how much money is spent divided by the lifetime costs and benefits of that project and coming up with a number. So you would definitely get smaller numbers in that case. And we didn't do that because it was a bit too cumbersome to compare it to the data for natural gas effectively, because it's such an ongoing expense.
You can have your reasons for why you did it, but when you look at this, it looks like nuclear is not subsidized, coal, natural gas are not subsidized, but that stuff up there is heavily subsidized. And I don't think that really matches what's going on. But I'm going to move on because I want to talk about CREZ transmission. And here's the basic premise of CREZ. I'm going to ask you, you there, what's your name? Jennifer. I like you. So I'm going to say, I'm going to give you $20 billion. What are you going to respond to that? Thanks. Yeah, you were raised right. But some might also have some questions, some follow-on questions. Are you have any follow-on questions? Why? Because it'll be good. It'll be good for Texas in this case. Okay, I'm doing this because that was the premise of CREZ. There's basically $20 billion waiting for you out in West Texas. But the catch is you have to build a $7 billion conveyor belt to go get that and bring it back. Okay? So if you have to spend $7 billion, is that going to be a good deal for you or not to go get that $20 billion? Yeah. A lot of people would think so. In fact, fortunately, that's what the state thought. It was worth going to get because it's going to be financed. So it's going to cost you $1 billion a year to get $3 billion every year in savings. So they're like, that's a good deal. That's the fundamental premise of how economic upgrades work for transmission in Texas. If you're going to save more money than it costs to build the transmission, it's called the economic upgrade, and they go and they do it. It's interesting because Asher Price was here talking, 2 weeks ago? Something roughly like 2-3 weeks ago? And he mentioned 3 gentlemen. I think they were the first 3 people he mentioned in his presentation as having a lot of zeal in their faith. And these were the 3 guys he mentioned. And incredibly, these are 3 people that were absolutely instrumental in CREZ development. And I was fortunate to work with all 3 of these gentlemen. Victor Carrillo ran a state task force that was looking at what they should do for energy programs and incentives in the state. And one thing that barely got in was the idea of CREZ. And I thank Victor Carrillo for getting it. Then it went over to the Public Utility Commission, and Barry Smitherman was over at the Public Utility Commission. And I can remember being in his office because we have a renewable portfolio standard. It's a mandate that said you have to have a certain amount of renewable energy. If people heard of that, Texas had one. It wasn't very big. But then we had this other thing that was called CREZ, and it said we're going to build transmission lines, and there were a few extra rules around it. And I remember asking him, I said, well, Commissioner Smitherman, are we going to, or do you support the amount of transmission we're going to build? Is it going to be to just what that mandate says, or is it to what the market wants? He says, we're going to build it for the market. You know, if people are going to want to use this and bring economic development for Texas, we're going to hook them up. And that was huge, and that's why we ended up with this really big number. It's because that's what the market said it wanted with all the wind power coming in. Oh, there's this other guy on there too, Rick Perry. He was really important. Some people, like in the environmental community, don't realize that at all. But to get those transmission lines, he's from West Texas. He really is big on infrastructure. And he decided this would be good for Texas. And he got behind it and really helped champion it through. So anyway, this is a rough map. And yes?
Just out of curiosity, because I've never met the market personally, and so I was wondering exactly how it managed to say that it wanted exactly $7 billion worth and not 70 or a different number.
Okay, it's actually where these guys come in, ERCOT. They did a whole lot of studies and estimating. There was technical studies from GE. They estimated how much stuff would cost. And it turned out this was such a big deal. And Jay, you used to work at the PUC, right? Can you think of any other proceeding they ever had in the history of the PUC where they had to move the hearings over to the Austin Convention Center because there were so many people showing up? There were over 1,000 people that would come up and contest these lines. So this was complicated. They busted it up into some different pieces, but one was to go out and make sure that where areas were where they thought we had really good wind, and then wind developers said, we want to build out here, and we're willing to show financial commitment and put like deposits down that we're actually going to show up out there. So it was a little bit of a special process, And the reason they have to use a special process for this, but not a coal plant or gas plant, is because those take a long time to build, a coal plant or gas plant, or especially a nuclear plant. Wind plants you could build very fast, and they were generally pretty small. So they were out of scale with the transmission. That's why we had this chicken and egg problem and had to go to a special solution. But once they found out that the wind guys wanted to use these areas, they got these lines built, or at least designated. Then they had another proceeding to actually pick the companies that would do it. And when you talk about subsidies and assigning that purely, that $7 billion goes to the wind industry, these are the companies that all got it. And interestingly, some of those companies were against CREZ, but they still went in and built the lines because they're transmission service providers. They build lines, the wind developers don't. And I want to point out one area, and this is one I would love for you to do a case study. There's one area on here that almost looks like it's also highlighted, and that's because it's South Texas Nuclear Project. And a very interesting thing about that one is they built, and this is close to 50 years ago, 40 to 50 years ago, they built enough transmission here for STMP units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Does anybody here know when units 3 and 4 came online? Yeah, we're still waiting. Now, this was all the companies that were going to build the power plants. They built the transmission line. That sounds more like a subsidy to me than what happened for the wind industry. And ratepayers are still paying for those lines, even though it never really met the used and useful standard, but it was in the very, very early days. Yes?
How far away are windmills in South Texas?
From these lines down here, there's quite a bit of stuff down here now. Yes? Oops.
No, the question was just how far away were the windmills in South Texas from those lines?
How far they were from these lines? Or these lines? I'm going to say an interesting thing was these were identified as zones back in the old days, but that's not where people wanted to use. They wanted to use these because this is windier in West Texas than it is down here. So this is where the infrastructure was built. This is, yes, it tends to be more south where the wind zones are in South Texas, and those are pretty strong, pretty good. They're different. It's a coastal wind, so they get more production in the summers from down there. It's not as much overall wind, but it's better timing. So that's why this has become popular. But I'm going to move on now from this one. I think we had a question over here as well.
So, Mike, thanks for being here. So fundamentally, this new transmission not only is good for dragging the power from where it's generated in the west to the load center in the east, but it does add in some way grid reliability because it's a mesh. Have you heard good estimates about how much you could allocate toward reliability versus just saying it's only for dragging the new wind? And by the way, then also, have you heard good estimates about, given we see this hockey stick of new utility scale solar, how would you apportion it to that in the future? And third, given Lubbock's going to join ERCOT from SPP, doesn't that top panhandle leg help with that?
Yes, this it does increase reliability across the state. I don't know about an apportionment if somebody's gone back to do that, because they do upgrades if they need them for reliability to keep the lights on. But then they also do them for economic upgrades. But every economic upgrade also helps with reliability. Now you mentioned it's helping a lot of solar develop out in this area, right? We're going to have a lot more, so you're sort of going to saturate the lines. Another very interesting thing is that there's just an enormous amount of oil and gas development going on out in the Permian Basin. And when the wind's not blowing, they're able to pump more oil because they're shipping power from this side. You know, that wasn't the basis for why we decided to do these lines, but it is a huge benefit. We're able to pump more oil out of the Permian Basin because of these lines. And I mean a tremendous amount of additional oil. In fact, there's a lot of new transmission development going on in this very, very far end of the system, even into the Delaware Basin out here. And you can only do it because we have this added infrastructure. So you always trigger something, just like, for instance, the nuclear plants. They triggered a massive amount of transmission construction. The coal plants, also a massive amount of transmission infrastructure that everyone uses then later. You know, it just creates the base network everyone benefits from. And I'll just say it ended up very happy for the wind industry. We celebrated when it all got done. And to this day, Upper Crust Bakery, they tell me this is the only cake they've ever done that had high voltage transmission lines on it. All right. So my advice is focus on cost savings because that's what got CREZ over the hump. You know, it was a 3-to-1 benefit. But still, a lot of people don't take my advice. And you were waiting for this one. So I'm bringing it. This is my favorite cover in the Texas Monthly of all time, but this is from December 2006. There's not as many young people in here, but December 2006, I figured some people were probably like playing with their new My Little Pony or something in 2006. But this is a long, long time. But he was vice president. He accidentally shot a guy in the face. Texas Monthly decided to take advantage of that. But it had an article about coal because TXU Electric wanted to build a massive amount of new coal plants in Texas. And the irony was, the reason they were doing it, does anybody know what happened? A big major weather event in 2005. Hurricane Katrina, and it messed up a lot of natural gas infrastructure. So natural gas prices just screamed upwards. Yet, still, Texas Monthly, when they're writing their article about coal, they say coal and gas are relatively cheap but pollute, and wind and solar are gentle but expensive, and electrical expense is a leading cause of eviction of poor people in America. And I was just like, at that time, wind was probably less than half the price of natural gas as fuel only. I'm not talking about a gas power plant, just relative to gas as fuel. And yet that's still what appears in media. And it's just like, it just shocks me sometimes what happens. But admittedly, that was 2006. However, 2 days ago, I get the Austin American Statesman. And they have an article in here about what happened at Georgetown, right? Which I suspect a lot of you are familiar, but Georgetown bought a lot of solar and wind. It was more than they needed. They were hoping to grow into it. So basically, they had more than their use. So what happens? You've got to go sell that, right? This extra power that you can't use. So they got to go sell it in the market. Well, here's how the Statesman summarized this. And by the way, Asher still works for the Statesman, right? Yes, he does. They say the reason is that, but Georgetown contracted for more energy than it could use, and the falling prices of gas and oil meant it had to sell its renewable surplus for less than forecast. Now, why would oil prices impact this at all? In fact, this is one, if you can come up and show this. It just irks me when I see like reporters get stuff that just seems so wrong. This is the one on the natural gas curve, this one. So, and if you can focus on the 3-year or 5-year, one of those two, up there at the top, yeah. So just on a 3-year. So their contract, did it pull it up? I don't think it pulled it up. Well, anyway, their contract was with solar was done in 2016, and then they renegotiated in 2016. So to say that, yeah, if you can get it on a 5-year, yeah. So anyway, their contract was done in 2015.
The axes are not labeled.
The axes are not labeled?
And the colors are not indicated.
Okay. So anyway, did you lose it when you go to the 3-year? Is that what happens? The main thing I just want to point out is if you look at this, oil and gas didn't even go down, right? They're about the same or they went up. So it seems like it's wrong on that point. But then oil doesn't really have anything to do, its prices, with electricity. It's what happens in the wholesale market. There's all sorts of other drivers. So this just seemed like it was way off base to come up with that as an answer. Okay, if we can switch back to the, all right. Do we have our stargazers here and can tell me what that is? The Pleiades, the seven sisters. So now I'm going to turn more into the oil and gas part of it. So these are the traditional seven sisters, these oil companies that at one point controlled about 80% of the oil reserves in the world. And anyway, going back to this issue of which is cheaper, oil or fossil fuel or renewable energy, I'm going to organize it as the seven sisters of truth. And I think you can do a direct comparison, cost comparison, which is very straightforward. But then as you roll in these other things, reliability, very real issue, something that needs to be looked at, environment, liberty and freedom, these are the categories that I want to sort of consider as I look at this going forward. And again, I want this conversation to go outside this room. I really want to have a dialogue that goes on long after this talk. Okay, first I'm going to start with direct cost comparison. How many people here are familiar with Lazard? It's a consulting firm. They put out a levelized cost of energy report. This is one from about 10 years ago. I just want to note where solar is. So like when the UT report came out, solar was much more expensive and was subsidized more. And this was probably even capturing stuff at residential level solar. But this one is for utility scale in general. But gas peakers are up here. So solar and gas peakers sort of were competing with each other. Energy efficiency is the cheapest with Jay, that's his bread and butter. But wind was at the low end of the spectrum, maybe natural gas combined cycle. That was sort of what was duking it out to go into the market. Well, let's move forward now to more than the present. And what has happened is that solar and wind now are the very lowest end of the cost range. And so what's going in tends to be wind and solar. Even natural gas combined cycle is having a hard time competing. And I will tell you, these are more national numbers. When you're talking about in Texas, the cost of a wind contract is typically about $15 a megawatt hour. Solar is maybe 20 to 25, depending on where you are in Texas. That's how cheap it is in Texas. So consequently, why don't you pull up now the interconnection queue? This is the most dramatic, surprising thing maybe in my career, is just the extent to which solar and wind, and here wind is shown in green, solar is shown in yellow. They got batteries at the top, but they're just pushing everything else out of the way. If you look at actually what's planning to come online, it's virtually all wind, solar, and batteries. And then you look at the things that have actually signed interconnection agreements that are really moving forward, it's wind and solar right now. There's virtually nothing else, and it's because of the cost. At this conference I was just at, they asked the question, do you think we will see any additional gas plants built because of the high price spikes we had this summer? 85% of people said no, it wasn't enough to motivate gas plants to be built. And that, to me, when you understand how tight our reserve margins are, how much we need power, how cheap natural gas is right now, and it's still, they're not coming online. And that's because wind and solar, and now batteries are coming on that are starting to take over. Now, this is a sophisticated audience. I'm going to ask, does anybody know sort of off the top of their head how many BTUs there are in a barrel of oil? I'm going to go to the back. Do you need to just throw out a number? 6 million BTU in a barrel of oil. And if a barrel of oil, right now, let's just say it's 45. Can you do the math on that one? Or pick a number. Yeah, it's like 6 million BTU in a barrel of oil. So per million, I'll just do it at 60. That's nice, easy math. When oil is $60 a barrel, it's $10 a million BTU. Gas now is about $2.50. So it's 4 times more expensive crude oil than natural gas. And that's why you don't see oil anywhere near this electric generation interconnect queue. It's just way too expensive to compete for oil. There's only one state that primarily uses oil. Does anybody know which state that is? Hawaii. Do you know what their average electric rate is? Yeah, it's like 30 to 35 cents kilowatt hour. So that it's backing up that, hey, oil's not really that cheap, is it? Got this right here. If we can switch back. So, and this is even going all the way back to 2009. And this is the reason they did CREZ, okay? Because wind generation had the impact of reducing wholesale and retail prices of electricity. And it's driving off, fossil units. A lot of these are, I'm not even going to identify. Can anybody guess what fuel Big Brown is? Yeah, it's retiring. And this is just so incredible. There are solar developments ringing around all of those coal plants. Within a matter of years, most of the coal plants we've had that have shut down are likely to be replaced by solar. People talk about this. It's like, we want to do this eventually in the future. We need to have all these big programs. The market alone, because of the prices, are driving this to happen right now in Texas. Now, let's switch over to transportation, because we talked about electricity. Renewables have an advantage in electricity because they're intrinsically electric. How many people here have EVs? All right, I do as well. Just got one this past week. All right, this is from the EIA information page. They basically have an electric or e-gallon, so they're comparing the cost to drive an electric car versus the cost of regular gasoline. Now, we got smart people here. The differential, about $1.40. If we use 143 billion gallons of gasoline per year in the United States, how much would the savings be if we could instantly convert every vehicle that burns gas into an electric vehicle? It's over $200 billion a year of potential savings if we just switched everything to EVs. Now that is quite a driver to be interested in building infrastructure. Just like that $20 billion in West Texas, let's build a conveyor belt. We should look really seriously about finding ways that we might be able to do that. Now, this is retail electricity at about 13 cents a kilowatt hour. Again, if you go into Amarillo, you can do wind projects there for 1/10 of that at wholesale, like $13 a megawatt hour. So you could do it at 12 cents a gallon if you could directly connect to a wind farm out in Amarillo right now. That's how much cheaper it is. And two, another interesting thing that goes on with the electric markets, they alter prices all the time. And there's times where we actually have negative prices. In fact, there's one project I'm aware of in Amarillo. Their average price for the month was minus half a cent a kilowatt hour, or minus $5 a megawatt hour. And I'm going to have to ask one of the PhDs here, what is that on a percentage basis? How much cheaper is it on a percentage basis to go from $2.65 a gallon to minus 5? I'm serious. That's a serious question. What is that on a percentage basis? I don't even know. I know it's a lot cheaper. And so it seems like there's a motivation to try to figure out how do we do that. That is very, very compelling. Now on the reliability one, that's a big one, right? Kauai Electric, in the state of Hawaii, they have this goal to decarbonize by 2045. And they have went from 8% renewables, and there was over 90% petroleum they were burning. and they've gotten up where they're over 50% now, but the reliability has increased by 50% by increasing renewables that much. And it's because they're including batteries. And so it's like, almost like a duh. Okay, you put batteries in the system, it's going to be more reliable, right? So, and this is the real breakthrough that they found. They were the first one that really did a large, lots of batteries with a solar to where they can discharge a whole lot of that solar power later in the day. And now what they're finding is that the solar plus storage, solar plus batteries, is cheaper than combined cycle plants. And this is just starting to happen all over the country, where solar plus batteries is taking over. Oh, and by the way, their rates dropped by 20% too by doing this in Kauai. I just want to pop over sort of this last little thing. These are other issues I want to talk about, but I'm just going to introduce the military one. And I've always felt, if you really look closely at oil, there's hidden costs. Now, this guy, some people know, Alan Greenspan, he said this at the time, that maybe some of these foreign wars have something to do with oil, basically. This guy, a lot of people know, Vladimir Putin, he said similar thing, that a lot of what we do has to do with oil. And this is my last slide, I think, here. I just want to point this out. And I actually was when I was in my early 20s, I was in Navy ROTC. And actually, 2 days, I was on a cruise in the Mediterranean. And we were steaming into the Gulf of Sidra, right off of Libya. And they decided, I think, to get the college kids off the ship right before they went in, because 2 days later is when the U.S. went and they shot down 2 Libyan jets in 1981. And it just seems like we've had just constant warfare in that area going on. And one thing I want to contrast, and okay, I'll mention, my mom is from Slovenia, Yugoslavia. And maybe I shouldn't go there. Anyway, her family was thrown in jail by the Gestapo. And her granddad, or my granddad, he got sent off to a concentration camp. Well, anyway, I never got to meet him. And anyway, World War II, when those 2 guys got killed, World War II was over within 10 days. Okay? It was a very clear mission. America knew what it was going to do then. When you talk about these 3 guys, we've had this war on terror going on for a long time. He was killed 13 years ago, I think 8 years ago, 8 years ago. We still have active military operations going on in all 3 of those countries, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. And just as somebody that was and my dad was in the National Guard, he was a colonel, lieutenant colonel. The one thing I would ask is, at least it would be great if America could clarify what the mission is. You know, what is it we're trying to do? I think that would be reasonable. I mean, this is in the news a lot right now, but it just seems like it would be something that would be helpful. All right, so which cost less for our future? I'm going to throw in, I guess, some stuff here on R&D. Energy historically has never done anything, or has paid very little into R&D. And I always love this slide because I heard the dog food industry spend about 2% on R&D. But in energy, we just don't spend a whole lot on R&D. I think that's changing now, but it's more in the private sector. So how many people here are familiar with the DOE budget? Maybe a little bit. Okay, this is sort of the current one. I think a lot of people think we're investing in energy for the future, but it's still mainly about nuclear bombs, nuclear waste cleanup, fundamental science, a lot of which is for nuclear. Now let's get into the renewable energy budget. And I only looked at this recently, but some of the things I'm most excited about are sustainable transportation. And that got cut by 73% in the last budget. So I think we're spending $68 million out of a $30 billion budget on something that seems like one of the most exciting things for our future. So anyway, I think with that, I will just close. This is my final slide. I really think we need to really chase what's the real truth, and that math is really, really important in the answer to really what we're going to be doing. I know you had different speakers and different voices, and it's so important to hear from all of them, but fundamentally we need to dig in and really see what the true math is on this. So thank you.
Beautiful, provocative discussion. I have questions, so Jenny, get the mic. And well, it's on its way there. I will say most of the things you said about our subsidy report most of the comments you made, I would say, are actually in there. And my one takeaway that I would really take from doing that, 1 out of 15 white papers for that full cost of electricity project, which is I don't want to do another subsidies report because you can use the same numbers and a different equation, and the math is correct in multiple cases, and you just pick the one you want in some sense to tell the story you want. They're all true. They all say something else. So that was my real takeaway, that I found not much utility in going through the process myself, I guess. Oh, I will make one takeaway. The total money we did have for subsidies was about the same total, a couple $2 billion a year for natural gas, which includes low-cost gas wells, right? There's about $1 billion for low-cost gas, but gas is really low-cost. Or high-cost gas wells, sorry. There's a subsidy for high-cost gas wells, even though gas is low-cost.
My question is quite simple. With oil increasing in cost to produce, why is it that the Permian Basin is drilling for and producing so much oil, and where are they selling it at those increased prices?
That's really a great question. This largely stems back to 2015 at the federal level. There was a tax expenditures bill, but it did 3 things in the energy industry. One was it brought back the investment tax credit for solar, which has really helped them boom. It got the production tax credit for the wind industry. It's helped them boom. But it also allowed the oil industry to export. And if you look at the graph, exports have just taken off like a meteor. I mean, they're really ramping up. And this might surprise some people, but right now, the United States exports 3 times as much crude oil, more than 3 times as much crude oil, as we import from the entire Persian Gulf. So you might wonder, like, well, we don't need the supply from the Persian Gulf anymore, right? We're actually shipping this off to other countries. 3 times as much we export as we bring in. But another thing that you can look at, I mean, these wars that are going on in those countries, the production's dropped in most all of those countries considerably. So there's a world market for oil, and we're stepping up and we're helping to fill that. And this is one I didn't get into, structural advantages that, if you go back to that one, that differential between electric vehicles and regular gasoline, it would seem much easier. In fact, I'm just going to walk through this one if we got a minute or two. I guess we're going to 6:15, right? Okay, we got time. All right. This is geared more toward the engineers in the crowd. I'm going to give 2 scenarios. Which sounds easier? Is to go out in the Permian Basin and you have methane, which is sort of like, truthfully, like a sloppy cow fart. You know, it's got gas, it's got oil, it's got water. You got to separate it all. You compress it. You put it in a pipeline, take it all the way over to the coast. Then you're going to chill it down, put it in a tanker that's refrigerated, ship it overseas. Then you're going to unrefrigerate it, put it in a pipeline, ship it over somewhere else. We're doing that. But to get an extension cord from Amarillo to Dallas to run EVs, we might not do any more of that. And it's like, from a technical standpoint, which one sounds easier from a technical standpoint? I would argue, I think that the extension cord should be easier, right? But they have condemnation authority. They've got all sorts of built-in advantages. It's much, much easier to build pipelines than it is overhead transmission line. And that's why I wanted to ask, if there was a legal person here, why is it so much easier to move hydrocarbons than it is to move electricity? And that's a kind of thing, that's a big picture thing if you can really grapple with, and you can make it as easy to move electricity as you can to move hydrocarbons, then we would be able to have a lot more electric vehicles.
So are you saying we could export electricity overseas instead of shipping LNG to those countries?
I'm saying you could if you just ship the solar panels over there, right? That's the beauty. This gets back on that one of like liberty and freedom. That's a big issue to a lot of people. And I'm going to ask coal. How many states do you think produce coal in the United States? It's about half. It's about half of them produce, at least some. There's a few that produce a whole lot. And oil and gas, it's about 2/3 of them. But already today, there's 51 states that produce commercial renewable energy. Because it's everywhere. Wind and solar is everywhere. And so you wouldn't ship the electricity over there, but there's opportunities that you can buy equipment, solar, batteries, wind, technology, and just generate it at site. And I'll just mention Lisa Murkowski. She's floated a bill that would basically raise some money for the U.S. government entities to go and try to discourage and remove barriers to using fossil fuel and nuclear technology in other countries because they want to export that. And I think that your next talk is largely going to be, right? It's not going to be about exports. I thought it's about, though, the benefits of using fossil fuel, the moral imperative, and I thought it was for other people around the world. It's just going to be physics fracture. It's physics, okay. All right. But I have heard that before. Some people think it is a moral imperative to provide that, but it can be done with all sorts of energy. But it seems a lot easier just to export the technology, have them put it in, use their own sunlight, their own wind, than it is to, build LNG terminals, for sure. And I suspect that's going to happen a lot in a lot of places in the world simply because you don't have time or money to spend on all that infrastructure. It's easier. Anybody that travels globally, you can look at the cell phones, infrastructure they have, and it's just like mind-boggling what's going on in California with the fires, right? That's like one of the wealthiest places on the planet, and yet their wires are some of the worst on the planet, right? The Camp Fire, 88 people, I think, died, 16 billion in damage, and it was started because the transmission line was so bad. That's what started the fire, the infrastructure.
I have another question, just to follow up. So whenever you produce oil, especially in places like the Wolf Camp, there's going to be a lot of natural gas produced. So if you subsidize oil production, you're necessarily going to subsidize natural gas production. So my question is for both of you. In the study, did the subsidies capture that when you were capturing subsidies for natural gas?
Good question on that one. We didn't account for that aspect in terms of your Austin American Statesman article. If they had made that connection, it could have at least made a connection from oil to cheap gas, producing oil, and they're getting gas on the side. But the straight answer is no, we didn't consider that. Let's just say we did not consider this, whatever subsidies might exist for drilling for oil and the impact it would have on lowering natural gas prices, for example.
You mentioned that solar plus battery is much cheaper than combined gas power cycles. So do you think it's easy to scale up solar and wind energy as we do with the conventional means of production?
You're talking about the ability to scale it up, and that's a really, really important question. Right.
And stuff.
Right. And here's the reality. I might be saying some stuff where I make it sound like, why are we possibly using oil and gas? We're going to use oil and gas for a long time. We need fossil fuels for a long time because we use so much energy. And your ability to manufacture and scale up this stuff, it's going to take time. And, if you go too fast, you're going to make mistakes. I'll mention in Korea, they want us, let's get batteries out fast. Well, they had like about 20 fires, I think, there, and these battery installations. So there's a great motivation for wanting to get access to this cheaper, cleaner technology that you know there's going to be other people that want to buy it in the future, but it's just going to take time to scale up. Now, does that answer your question or not really? Yes. Okay.
I have a question. For example, in American, what do you think in future the future energy will be replaced by the renewable the energy mostly? Yeah.
Here's a really big question is when you think of where oil prices are now, and they're 4 times, at least domestically, what natural gas is. And natural gas is having a hard time competing against wind and solar in a lot of markets. Not everywhere, but in a lot of markets. Then you look at the differential, what it costs, to fuel an electric vehicle versus a regular one. As more technology comes in, that has to put downward price pressure on oil in this market. And you can see the possibility where oil prices will have to drop. They're going to respond to market forces. And that's why it's so important, I think, that they're able to export it. They're trying really hard to export to other markets where energy is much more expensive and they don't have infrastructure to use other stuff. But in the long run, and maybe it's not even that long, there's this, I think, it's compelling. The cost advantages of wind and solar and batteries, they're just coming down. I mean, especially when you look at solar. I used to work for a company called Astropower. And what they did, they would get waste Pentium chips, rejects from the computer industry. They would scrub off the proprietary circuitry, but it was the same wafer. They put their stuff on. Well, you know how much memory has dropped, right? It's Moore's Law. It just keeps going down and down and down. And it's a very similar semiconductor-driven technology, no moving parts. I'm saying we've more than scratched the surface of how good these can get, but they still have tremendous cost reduction potential. And when you look at the cost differential with oil and where it already is, I mean, the world market price right now for solar panels is about 25 cents a watt. When I started my career, it was about $10 a watt. Even the stuff we were doing like at Austin Energy was like $5 a watt. So it's dropped by a factor of 20. And down there, it's just very compelling, and it's so easy. You can put it everywhere, right? And you can't necessarily say that with these other technologies. Solar is the one that's really compelling, especially with battery technology improving as much as it is. Restated, okay. How long will it take before we see this big? I will tell you, in the electric market, the turning point in Texas is already going on. You can look, like this year, wind power is up to where coal is. It's actually passing coal in the amount. It's moving into the number 2 position. And only natural gas is ahead of it. Solar is going to come screaming up really fast. And I predict you go out maybe 20 years, it'll be the biggest resource we use in Texas. And, we're blessed with really good solar. And we've got, really the bigger thing is, we've got really good market design. It's easy to do projects, competitive projects. A lot of other places, it's still hard to go in and do new generation projects. Like when you go to some places on little islands, it really helps if you know somebody that's related to like the president or something like that. Well, that's not the way the markets work here in Texas. If you've got an idea, you can go in, you deploy your capital, things can happen really fast. Now, I'm going to mention something about California. Since you did California, in Texas, I'm going to mention something. I had a group from Japan that I was in charge for showing around with various stakeholders here in Texas and then taking them out to California. And, Texas was doing really, really well. Well, we go out to California. The head of the delegation, which was female, she had to go back, but she asked one of the people that worked for her, after the presentation from the California Energy Commission, which lasted for a full hour, he raises his hand and gets called on. He's like, yes, I was asked to ask just one question. Why did you make it so complicated? And when you have places like that, you can't just go in and do projects real fast, and it will take longer. So a lot of it depends on things that aren't technical, right? It's legal issues, regulatory issues that'll govern a lot how fast we can do it in other places.
Thank you.
What is the cost of solar? And I was giving an energy cost, if you get a contract, if you go out and get a purchase power agreement now, sort of the market rate for our part of Texas is probably around $25 a megawatt hour, which is 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Here in Austin, our retail electricity is about 10 or 11. I mean, if you go back to after Hurricane Katrina, it was, two times, 3 times higher than that was the average wholesale market price. Now, that's sort of... The wholesale for gas? Okay, if you just look at gas fuel, and let's call it $2.50. It can go up a little higher or down some. But your combined cycle plants, they're close to 50% efficiency. So you're going to be like 1.25 cents a kilowatt hour, or $12.50 a megawatt hour just for the fuel. But, building the plant is an additional amount. And 2, they don't get to run as much. This is a much deeper thing, but what really helps wind and solar here is the way a lot of people don't realize we've dramatically changed, and this is what really hurts coal, is that we have an auction every 5 minutes for what power plants get to run in the state of Texas. Most places in the United States do it the same way. So they're trying to use the absolute cheapest things to run every 5 minutes. Well, what has the lowest fuel cost? It's going to be wind and solar. So if wind and solar are available, those are able to bid in and cover their marginal costs easier than a gas plant or a coal plant or even a nuclear plant. So those sort of get pushed off the system and are supposed to shut down, and the cheapest things we run. We developed a market, and Jay was real involved in it, right? There's a lot of rulemaking that went on, and a lot of smart people worked on it, but it was striving for the maximum economic efficiency, lowest cost, but still reliable. So if for some reason you think you might, have the power go out, then you don't use the absolute cheapest thing. It's a security-constrained economic dispatch. That's what we use in Texas. And it's worked pretty well. A lot of other places have had blackouts. We've gotten close, but we haven't really had a major blackout or even rolling blackouts in quite a long time.
Okay, thanks for a great discussion, Mike. Let's welcome him again and thank him again. Thanks.